You wake up every morning with good intentions. You tell yourself that today will be different, that this time you'll stay focused, disciplined, and unstoppable. But before the first hour has even passed, you've already given away pieces of your self-control. The worst part? Most of the time, you don't even realize it. Every tiny choice, pressing snooze, checking your phone before your mind is awake, skipping the glass of water and reaching straight for caffeine, delaying the task you promised you'd start. These aren't random slips. They are habits. And habits aren't just actions. They are decisions that silently shape your identity. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. What destroys your discipline isn't the lack of willpower, intelligence, or motivation. It's the habits you've let grow unnoticed. And they spread like cracks in a wall, invisible at first, but over time they break the entire structure. As you listen today, you'll notice something powerful. You'll catch yourself thinking, "That's me. I did that today. I do that every week." This is the loop I want you to enter, a silent count. Every time I describe a habit, ask yourself, have I already done this today? Am I doing it right now? The more times you recognize yourself, the clearer it will become why your discipline feels impossible to sustain. This is not about shame. This is about awareness. Because you cannot change what you don't name. And once you see these patterns, you can break them. Step by step, choice by choice, discipline stops being something you chase and starts being something you embody. Video will expose the habits that kill your self-control before it can even take root. You'll learn why quitting these habits matters more than adding new routines. And you'll see how Stephen Covey's timeless principles of daily choices, identity, and alignment transform discipline from something fragile into something unbreakable. So, let me ask you directly, do you want unbeatable self-control? Not the kind that fades when you're tired, not the kind that depends on how you feel in the morning, but the kind that becomes part of who you are. If the answer is yes, stay here. Because from this moment on, every word is going to hold up a mirror. And before we continue, I'll ask you something simple. Subscribe now. Not to follow another motivational channel, but to commit with yourself, to make sure these reminders reach you before the habits that weaken you do. Each video here is a brick in the foundation of the identity you're building. Now take a breath, because we're about to uncover what self-control really is. Not a trick, not a secret, but a way of living that no one can take away from you. People often mistake self-control for sheer willpower. They think discipline is about grinding harder, pushing longer, or constantly forcing themselves against resistance. But willpower is fragile. It burns out under stress, collapses when fatigue sets in, moments you need it most. That's why so many people promise to change on Monday and give up by Friday. Unbeatable self-control is something different. It isn't about fighting yourself every day. It's about building a life where you no longer have to fight. True discipline is not the absence of temptation, but the presence of clarity. When your actions are aligned with your values, when your choices serve your bigger vision, self-control stops being a battle and starts being your natural state. Stephen Covey often explained that private victories always come before public victories. This means that the greatest achievements you'll ever have in the world begin with invisible choices no one else sees. The moment you choose to wake up when you said you would. The decision to stay consistent with what you promised yourself even when no one is watching. These are the battles that forge the kind of discipline that no storm can break. Think of it this way. Willpower is like trying to hold your breath underwater. You can force it for a moment, maybe even longer than most people. But eventually, your body fights back and you gasp for air. That's what happens when you try to rely on willpower alone. It always runs out. But self-control built on principles is different. It's like learning how to breathe in rhythm with the current. You don't fight the water, you flow with it. That's why it becomes sustainable. The reason so many fail isn't because they are weak, it's because they are misaligned. They think self-control is about saying no over and over, when in reality, it's about saying a deeper yes. A yes to identity, a yes to purpose, a yes to the kind of person they want to become. When that yes is strong enough, the no's take care of themselves. Let's be clear, unbeatable self-control doesn't mean you'll never feel temptation, laziness, or fear again. It means those feelings lose their power over your decisions. They can scream, but they don't move you. You've already decided who you are, and that decision is stronger than any emotion of the moment. This is the heart of discipline, identity-driven choices. Because every habit you keep is a vote for who you are becoming. Every time you honor a commitment to yourself, You cast a vote for the identity of someone unstoppable. And every time you break that commitment, you cast a vote for weakness, for the version of you that negotiates everything away. So ask yourself, what identity are you reinforcing today? When you hit snooze, when you scroll endlessly, when you say, "I'll do it tomorrow," those aren't neutral actions. They are votes, and they add up. A life without control isn't built in a single collapse. It's built in small daily compromises that stack until your character bends. The beauty is that the reverse is so true. Every small act of alignment strengthens you. Choosing water instead of excuses. Ask when you don't feel like it. Saying no to what distracts you because you already said yes to your higher purpose. Each one of these is a brick in the foundation of self-control. Over time, the structure becomes so solid that it cannot be shaken. That's what unbeatable really means. And here lies the catch. Most people never lose discipline in the obvious moments. They lose it quietly, through habits so small they don't even notice. It's the slow erosion, the invisible leak, the daily compromise disguised as something harmless. That is where self-control is destroyed long before it has the chance to grow strong. Discipline rarely collapses in dramatic ways. More often, it dissolves quietly, piece by piece, through habits so ordinary that they escape your attention. These are the silent enemies. They don't announce themselves as threats. They look harmless, even normal, but together they carve away your strength until self-control feels impossible. Think about the moments you excuse yourself with the phrase, "just this once." One skipped commitment, one delayed task, one unchecked distraction. You don't notice the cost right away, but every small permission is like loosening a brick from the foundation. Sooner or later, the structure gives way, not because of one blow, but because of hundreds of tiny cracks. These habits are not always about laziness or obvious procrastination. They often disguise themselves as reasonable choices. Checking your phone just for a minute. Postponing the workout because you'll make it up tomorrow. Accepting interruptions instead of protecting your focus. Each of these looks like nothing in isolation. But patterns are not built in isolation. They are built in repetition. What you tolerate consistently becomes your identity. That's why these invisible habits matter so much. They aren't slips of behavior. They are signals to yourself about who you are willing to be. Every compromise whispers, "I can't be trusted with my own decisions." And when you hear that whisper enough times, you start to believe it. This is how subtle the erosion can be. You tell yourself you are disciplined because you work hard, but then you spend hours reacting to messages instead of creating what matters. You tell yourself you are focused because you have goals, but then you scatter your attention across distractions. You convince yourself you are committed, but you keep negotiating the basics when no one is watching. This is the quiet battlefield of discipline. And the truth is, most people lose long before the big test even arrives. They think they failed because the challenge was too great, but in reality, they failed because they drained their strength on 1,000 small leaks before the real challenge came. By the time it mattered most, they had nothing left to stand on. Think of someone trying to carry water in a cracked vessel. They may walk carefully, with determination, but no matter how strong their grip, the water leaks out drop by drop. That's what happens when you ignore the habits that seem harmless. They drain you long before you reach your destination. This is why quitting certain habits is far more powerful than adding new routines. You can try to stack productivity hacks on top of your day, but if the leaks are still there, the strength keeps draining away. True change starts with elimination, with saying no to the patterns that weaken you, with refusing to negotiate in the places you once thought didn't matter. The difficult part is that these habits don't feel like enemies. They feel comfortable, familiar, sometimes even rewarding. That's why they escape your attention. The scroll on your phone gives you a quick hit of relief. The skipped task gives you a moment of ease. The excuse buys you temporary comfort. But what feels good in the moment quietly dismantles your ability to trust yourself. And discipline without self-trust cannot exist. So the real question isn't, do you have discipline? The real question is, what have you been tolerating that makes discipline impossible? Because until you shine a light on these silent enemies, you will keep fighting battles that are already lost. And here's the shift. When you finally see them, when you name the habits that weaken you, you gain back the power to choose. You stop living on autopilot and start reclaiming your energy. That's when discipline begins to feel less like resistance and more like freedom. Because you are no longer dragged by habits you didn't choose. You are guided by the ones that align with your identity. And if you've been wondering why your progress always feels fragile, This is why. It's not that you lack strength. It's that your strength is being stolen quietly. Every time you let a small compromise pass, every time you excuse a behavior you know doesn't belong, you feed the very cycle that holds you back. But the moment you cut these invisible strings, something powerful happens. You feel lighter, stronger, more in control than you thought possible. That is the power of awareness. Once you see clearly what has been robbing you, you can't unsee it. And from there, discipline is no longer a vague dream. It becomes a daily decision that builds health. And this brings us to the next step in our journey. Not all habits are equal. Some cut deeper than others, and a few specific patterns have the power to completely paralyze your discipline if left unchecked. To understand them is to expose the very roots of why self-control slips away. Some habits attack discipline like thieves in the night. They don't come with warning signs. They slip in quietly and leave you wondering why your strength feels weaker each day. 3 of them are especially dangerous because they disguise themselves as normal, even harmless. But they drain the very energy that makes self-control possible. The first is procrastination. Not the obvious kind where you refuse to work altogether, but the subtle form, the small delay. You tell yourself, I'll start after this message, or just 5 more minutes. What feels like a harmless pause is actually the destruction of momentum. Self-control lives in movement. The moment you postpone, you break the rhythm, and once that rhythm is broken, restarting costs twice as much energy. People think procrastination is about laziness, but it's not. It's about training your mind to believe that delay is acceptable. And the more often you repeat it, the more natural it feels to abandon yourself. The second silent killer is constant comparison. Every time you measure yourself against someone else's progress, you dilute your own. Discipline requires clarity of direction, but comparison scatters your attention. Instead of moving with focus, you waste energy chasing standards that were never yours. You bend your schedule, your habits, even your goals just to fit into shapes that don't belong to you. The result? You feel exhausted not because you worked hard, but because you worked without alignment. Comparison doesn't push you forward, it makes you restless. And restlessness is the enemy of discipline. The third habit is excuses. Not the dramatic ones, but the daily ones you repeat so often that you start believing them. I don't have time. I'm too tired. Tomorrow will be better. These phrases sound harmless, but they rewrite your identity every time you say them. Excuses teach your mind that your word is flexible, that your commitments are negotiable, that your future can wait. And when your brain believes this long enough, self-control becomes impossible. Because how can you trust yourself if every promise is followed by a way out? These habits don't just interrupt your discipline, they erode your self-respect. And without self-respect, discipline has no foundation. You cannot build strength on broken trust. That's why eliminating these patterns matters more than adding new ones. Because until you stop tolerating procrastination, comparison, and excuses, every other strategy will collapse under their weight. Notice how all 3 have one thing in common. They operate quietly. They rarely look like destruction. Procrastination looks like rest. Comparison looks like ambition. Excuses look like self-protection. But underneath, each one is stealing the same thing: your ability to stay aligned with the person you claim to be. Think back on your own day. How many times did you delay a task, not because you couldn't do it, but because you didn't feel like it? How many times did you scroll through someone else's achievements and feel smaller, less capable, distracted from your own path? How many times did you let an excuse slip by and call it reasoning? Every single one of those moments is a withdrawal from your self-control. And the truth is, most people bankrupt themselves in this way long before they face real tests of discipline. But here's the part most people miss. Quitting these habits doesn't weaken you. It frees you. Because every time you resist procrastination, you reinforce momentum. Every time you stop comparing, you recover focus. Every time you silence an excuse, you rebuild trust with yourself. These are not small wins. They are acts of liberation. They restore the energy that was leaking away unnoticed. And when you experience this shift, discipline begins to feel different. It no longer feels like carrying a heavy burden yourself through each day. It feels like moving with clarity, lighter, stronger. You realize that self-control isn't something you add on top of your life. It's something you recover by stripping away what never belonged there in the first place. The great mistake is believing that these habits are too small to matter. That one delay won't hurt, one comparison won't sting, one excuse won't change anything. But repetition compounds. A single drop of water can do nothing to a rock, but repeated long enough, it carves valleys. Your habits carve you in the same way. They sculpt the kind of person you become. And every small decision, every tolerated compromise, leaves its mark. This is why the path to unbeatable self-control begins not with new routines, but with renunciation. With the courage to say, "This does not belong in the life I am building." When you draw that line, when you stop entertaining the quiet thieves, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time. Control returning to your hands. And once you taste that, even for a moment, you understand something vital. Discipline is not about adding more weight to carry. It's about dropping the weight that was never yours to hold. That realization is the turning point. But of course, the story doesn't end here. Because beyond these obvious enemies, there are deeper patterns, ways of thinking and behaving that seem almost natural but are, in truth, the very roots of lost discipline. To uncover those is to confront the heart of why self-control slips through your fingers. The most dangerous habits are not the visible ones. They are the patterns that take root so deeply that you confuse them with your personality. They feel like just the way I am, but in reality, they are choices repeated so often that they became invisible. These are the forces that paralyze discipline from the inside out. One of the most subtle but destructive is the dependence on motivation. Many people believe they need to feel ready before they act. They wait for the spark, the energy, the perfect moment. But discipline cannot depend on mood. If you feel motivated, you surrender control to emotions that shift like the wind. True strength is moving regardless of how you feel. Because feelings are temporary, but choices carve identity. The more you rely on motivation, the more fragile your self-control becomes. Another deep enemy is self-negotiation. You make a promise to yourself, but when the moment comes, you start bargaining. I'll do it later. I've already done enough today. Skipping once won't matter. These negotiations feel reasonable, but they are poison. Every time you negotiate with yourself, you weaken the part of you that commits and strengthen the part of you that retreats. Discipline thrives on clarity, not deals. Once your word becomes conditional, trust disappears. And without trust, self-control collapses. Closely tied to this is the habit of living by mood. You convince yourself that your state determines your ability to act. If you're tired, you don't push. If you're sad, you withdraw. If you're distracted, you let the day drift. But discipline is not about waiting for the right state of mind. It's about creating it through action. You don't move because you feel strong. You feel strong because you moved. When you reverse this order, your emotions stop being the driver and return to their rightful place, passengers. Notice how all three habits, motivation dependence, self-negotiation, and mood-driven living, share a common lie. They tell you that control exists outside of you. Motivation depends on external sparks. Negotiation depends on circumstances. Mood depends on feelings. Each one steals responsibility from your hands and gives it to forces you cannot command. And as long as you live this way, self-control will always feel like sand slipping through your fingers. But when you break these habits, something shifts. Imagine a day where you act not because you feel like it, but because you decided to. Imagine building trust with yourself so solid that no internal debate is needed. Imagine feeling tired or discouraged and still moving forward, not out of pressure, but out of identity. That is what it means to hold discipline at its deepest level. And here is the truth. Freedom comes not from doing what you feel like, but from not being enslaved by feelings. Every time you depend on motivation, you're a slave to energy. Every time you negotiate, you're a slave to comfort. Every time you wait for the right mood, you're a slave to chance. Discipline breaks chains, not by adding strength, but by removing the illusion that you ever needed those chains in the first place. Think of it as building an anchor. When the storms of emotion come, exhaustion, doubt, distraction, most people drift because they never had an anchor. But once you cut dependence, once you stop negotiating, once you act regardless of mood, you drop that anchor deep. The storms still come, but you no longer drift. You hold steady, not because the storm is weaker, but because your foundation is stronger. The cost of ignoring these deep habits is high. You might achieve small victories, but they will always be fragile. You'll start strong in January and collapse by March. You'll feel powerful on good days, but powerless on bad ones. You'll chase routines, but never embody them. And this cycle will convince you that discipline is impossible, when the truth is, you simply built it on weak ground. So what happens when you quit these habits? You discover a new kind of energy. Not the rush of motivation, but the quiet strength of consistency. Not the thrill of starting, but the peace of continuing. Not the pride of negotiating a compromise, but the dignity of keeping your word. This is where discipline transforms from an exhausting chase into a way of being. And it's at this level that identity begins to take shape. You are no longer someone trying to become disciplined. You are someone who simply does what they said they would do. The line between effort and identity blurs, and what once felt heavy becomes natural. But to truly understand this shift, you must see discipline not only as an external action, but as a reflection of who you believe you are. That's the deeper battlefield. Not habits, not moods, but identity itself. And when you master that, self-control stops being fragile and becomes unshakable. The real shift in discipline happens when you stop seeing it as something you do and start seeing it as something you are. Actions may come and go, but identity is what sustains them. Habits are important, yes, but habits alone are fragile if they are not rooted in a deeper belief about who you are becoming. Think about it. When you say, "I'm trying to be disciplined," you create distance between yourself and the identity you want. You're placing discipline outside of you, like a skill you're chasing. But when you say, "I am disciplined," you close the gap. Your choices no longer feel like battles. They feel like expressions of who you are. This is why so many attempts to change fail. People try to force new behaviors on top of an old identity. They want to wake up early, but deep down they still see themselves as someone who struggles with mornings. They want to eat clean, but still see themselves as someone who just can't resist. They want to stay focused, but still carry the label of being distracted. Until identity shifts, discipline will always feel like resistance. Transformation begins when you start voting differently with your actions. Every time you follow through on a commitment, you're not just completing a task, you're casting a vote for the identity of someone trustworthy, someone disciplined, someone who doesn't negotiate. The more votes you cast, the stronger that identity becomes. And soon, the question is no longer, will I stay disciplined? But, who else could I possibly be? The key is to move from external results to internal alignment. External goals, losing weight, earning more, finishing projects, are powerful motivators, but they can't carry you forever. Once the goal is reached, discipline often collapses. But when your discipline is tied to identity, it doesn't end when the result arrives. It continues because it's no longer about achieving something. It's about being someone. Imagine two people facing the same temptation. One says, "I can't, I'm on a diet." The other says, "No, I don't eat that." The first is relying on discipline as effort. The second is relying on discipline as identity. That small difference changes everything. Because one is negotiating, while the other has already decided. Identity closes the door that effort keeps trying to hold shut. This shift also redefines failure. When discipline is only about action, failure feels final. You missed a day, you broke a promise, you think the whole effort is ruined. But when discipline comes from identity, failure becomes feedback. One misstep doesn't erase who you are. You simply return to alignment with the identity you've chosen. That's why this transformation lasts. Because identity is more stable than motivation, stronger than moods, and deeper than effort. The challenge, of course, is patience. Identity isn't built in one decision, but in the repetition of decisions. It requires faith in the process, trust in yourself, and consistency in the unseen moments. But once it takes root, it changes everything. Because when you are disciplined at the level of identity, you no longer need to argue with yourself each day. The decision has already been made. Think of it as drawing a line in stone instead of in sand. Sand shifts with every wave, but stone endures. When you ground your discipline in identity, no storm, no excuse, no distraction can erase it. You don't wake up wondering if you'll stay disciplined. You wake up knowing who you are. And this is the freedom most people never experience. They think discipline is about restriction, about cutting joy out of life. But in reality, discipline is freedom. It frees you from chaos, from regret, from the endless cycle of starting and stopping. It frees you from being ruled by impulses, from living at the mercy of moods. It frees you to build, to create, to live in alignment with the person you've always known you could be. This is the transformation, quitting the habits that weaken you. Yes, but more importantly, embracing the identity that strengthens you. Every choice you make is either reinforcing the old self or building the new one. And the more you choose alignment, the less discipline feels like effort because it becomes simply who you are. And once you experience that, even for a moment, you realize something undeniable. The life you've been chasing doesn't need to wait. It can begin the moment you decide to embody it. That's why unbeatable self-control isn't about forcing discipline. It's about becoming the person for whom discipline is natural. Which leads us to the closing step in this journey. Because identity gives you the foundation, but it still requires a daily decision to protect it. The final step is learning how to keep that identity alive, even when everything around you tries to pull you back. Self-control is not a trick you learn, it is a life you build. And the truth is, you've already felt both sides of it. You know the weight of living without it, the restless nights, the broken promises, the cycle of starting strong and quitting halfway. You also know the glimpse of power that comes when you follow through, when you keep your word, when you act regardless of mood. That moment of strength is proof. It shows you what is possible. The difference between the two versions of you is not talent, not intelligence, not luck. It's alignment. One version lives from excuses, negotiations, and moods. The other lives from identity, clarity, and consistency. And the choice between them is made not in the future, but in the smallest details of today. Think about the cost of the life built on compromise. It doesn't collapse all at once. It wears you down little by little. You lose respect for yourself. You stop trusting your own word. And eventually, you stop dreaming because every dream feels too heavy for someone who can't even hold on to the basics. That is the quiet tragedy of a life without self-control. Not that you fail, but that you stop believing you can succeed. But now picture the other path. Imagine waking up tomorrow not as someone who is trying to be disciplined, but as someone who simply is. Imagine moving through your day without needing to argue with yourself. Imagine keeping promises without hesitation, not because it's easy, but because it's who you are. That is what it feels like to live with unbeatable self-control. And that version of you isn't far away. It begins the moment you refuse to negotiate with the habits that weaken you. Discipline is not about perfection. You will still stumble. You will still face days when emotions scream louder than reason. But discipline rooted in identity doesn't break at the first failure. It bends, it learns, it returns stronger. Because failure no longer defines you, it refines you. And every return is another vote for the identity you've chosen. Remember this, self-control is not the cage of your life, it is the key. Without it, every opportunity slips through your fingers. With it, every opportunity becomes possible. It does not limit you, it frees you. It frees you from regret, from doubt, from the endless weight of inconsistency. It frees you to build, to grow, to live a life you don't want to escape from. And here's the truth you cannot ignore. No one is coming to give this to you. No motivation, no external push, no perfect moment. It is yours to claim. The choice is not tomorrow. It is not next week. It is not someday. The choice is now. Every word you've heard today is not information. It is a mirror. And only you can decide what reflection you'll leave with. If these words resonate with you, if you feel the truth pressing inside you, don't let it fade. Subscribe now, not for me, but for yourself. Let each message here remind you that you are not trying anymore. You are becoming. Every new subscriber here isn't a number. It's a decision, a silent declaration. I refuse to go back. Make that decision today. And when this video ends, don't stop here. Because discipline is not built in one message. It is forged in constant reinforcement. That's why I want you to continue this journey with the next video. It will take the identity you've claimed today and show you how to protect it. Even when the world, your habits, and your old self try to pull you back. Don't miss it. Because discipline is not fragile when it is tied to who you are. And now, you know exactly what to quit, and more importantly, who to become.